Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is an absolutely fantastic thrill ride into the deep expanse of space and time. As ever, a huge thank you to the author, Depsurrel, I hope I pronounced that right, for allowing me to cover their work. And please do of course let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag Team Fear. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled I Work for NASA and I Know What We Really Saw on Mars. Let's get straight into that. When I was 11, my mother bought me a telescope from a novelty store. It was old, about 10 or so years maybe, slightly rusted from time, but never used. The next night, I was out to a small field and used it to gaze into the sky. The moment the reflective lights of the planet shined into my eyes was the moment that I knew what I wanted to do. Our twin sister, Venus, so alike and yet more different than we could have ever imagined, and Jupiter, the titanic guardian of the inner planets, morph in the system around it, Saturn, with her beautiful and luscious rings that envelop her sky, Mercury, a small and rapid rock that was closer to the light than anyone on Earth could withstand, and most of all, Mars, the red planet, a fearsome war-born neighbour, and what would be the next step on humanity's path to the stars. I knew with just one look that I wanted to help guide us on that path. I've been working at NASA for over 15 years now, and in that time I've seen dozens of proposals for a manned landing on Mars. Hundreds of people spend weeks at a time discussing the engineering process behind designing a craft capable of carrying out the task of transporting mankind back and forth between the two planets. Millions of dollars poured into projects that never came to light, and for the longest time the problem was that we simply couldn't feasibly land someone on the planet and then help them return home safely. In part, that was one of the reasons we launched the Mars Exploration Rovers. If you don't know, I'll go over it briefly. The MER was a mission that involved launching 2 rovers to explore the surface of Mars, and the 2 were named Spirit and Opportunity. They will be the successors to the prior Sojourner rover. The data collected thanks to the MER is invaluable, and at any other time I'd love to divulge them. They were only planned to last 90 days, but the guys back in engineering seriously put in some effort. They lasted longer than they should have after arriving in early 2004. And for most of the mission, it wasn't too special. We gathered as much data as we could, had the rovers explore their surroundings, mine up rocks sometimes. Nothing too special to write home about, unless you're really interested in Martian minerals. Now, officially, Spirit's mission ended after getting stuck in a sandpit in 2009, losing all power the year later, and the mission declared complete after another year. And this is partially true. Spirit really did lose her power after she got stuck. It's partially our fault. She had fallen into a slight dip in the ground, and the risk of falling deeper was huge. We assumed it was a sandpit and acted like we always had, but alas, it wasn't. Upon instructing her to escape, Spirit lost her footing, falling into a deep hole. Her signal strength was heavily weakened by her fall, and the sands of Mars were destined to bury the rover alive. I spent most of the time with Spirit after she fell in. It's strange, yes, but I felt and still feel an attachment to the rovers. Seeing her trapped in the dunes of Mars was like watching my daughter trip into a well. And still, she remained operational for nearly 2 months, even if the data she was sending quickly became the same tedious graphics and images that were hampered by time. Most of our crew shifted focus to Opportunity, but I stayed behind with Spirit. The closer she got to the end of her lifespan, the longer we had to wait between the responses. The last time we heard from her officially was late in March. We tried for months to communicate, partially at my insistence, and Spirit was like my child. I wouldn't let her go so easily. My persistence paid off in the end. In late December, Spirit responded to a data request, and for what I could tell, she had somehow fallen even deeper, finding a cave. And by some miracle, she remained upright, allowing us to maneuver her through the cavern. And when we requested an image, she obliged, and 6 minutes later, the delay between receiving orders and sending data, thanks to the distance, it arrived. And what we saw was baffling, to say the least. It was a perfectly vertical wall with strange unknown symbols carved into its surface. There are many possible explanations for this, so nobody on the crew jumped at extraterrestrial as the cause. We ordered Spirit to get closer and take another photo. It never arrived. Spirit stopped responding once again, likely due to her dying batteries. I thought that was it for her. The image was classified to keep the public from freaking out, at least until we determined an explanation behind the sigils in the wall. And shortly after that, Spirit's mission was declared complete. And then, out of the blue, she sent an image. This was puzzling. It was the only thing she had sent, despite the hundreds of requests for other forms of data and status updates after the last picture. My guess is that Spirit had actually received her previous order for a photograph, but, for whatever reason, was unable to send it back until that point. Due to the circumstances, barely anyone was made aware of the incident. It was just me and a few others who examined the picture. It was pitch black. You couldn't make out anything even if you tried. That is, until someone suggested brightening it. It was still near total darkness, but in the corner there were 2 very distinct red dots, aimed directly at the camera. We couldn't shake how much they looked like eyes, and apart from that, the cavern was slightly visible, appearing to be vastly different on a location than we had last seen. Spirit must have moved significantly, but where to? And more importantly, how, is something I'm still not entirely sure of. Most of the attention was drawn to the red glowing dots. This wasn't necessarily proof of anything. There are several possible answers for what they could be. The camera might have detected large pieces of dust, and due to the quality loss of brightening, it appeared much rounder than it really was. It could be a reflection of the rover's lights on the cave wall. That's the answer we settled on. But I knew something was off. I think my colleagues did too. And that was the last we received from Spirit. We stopped trying to communicate with her. We had more important things to focus on, namely the remaining rover, Opportunity and Curiosity, who was to be launched in November. I've always considered Opportunity and Spirit to be twins, brother and sister, with a shared purpose of propelling humanity into the future, taken after their eldest brother, Sojourner. I was still studying when Sojourner was active, but I can try and dig around for information on him sometime later. I've heard he has some really interesting finds, but I'm getting off track. Opportunity is much the star of the MER. He lasted over 15 years on the harsh Martian landscape, powering through dust, rock, and time with a passionate heart of 7 billion people behind him. Oppie, as he came to be called, was for a few months the only active rover until Curiosity's arrival in 2012. Although not as focused on the subject of life as his younger sibling, he still provided invaluable information. I've never been more proud of a little rover in my life than when I was of that little guy. And without his twin, Oppie had to function alone, even if only for a short period. And still, I didn't want him to feel alone without Spirit. I dedicate her memory to him. Oppie's mission officially came to a halt 2 years ago. A severe dust storm had sent him into hibernation, a sleep from which he could never awake. Last February, we stopped trying to awaken him and bid farewell to Opportunity. And that's the official story, and, unlike Spirit, it's much further from the truth, and there's a darn good reason for keeping it a secret. Although he was supposed to be in hibernation during the storm, Oppie would occasionally send back information about odd, seemingly volcanic rocks. This was obviously startling, and not just because the rover was somehow operating during hibernation, where he was stationed. Oppie wasn't in range of any volcanic fixtures. The only way he could be sending this data was if he somehow reactivated during the storm, and if a group of volcanic rocks just so happened to be pushed by the winds close enough for him to reach. Needless to say, the chances of that occurring are slim to none. Knowing the media panic that would ensue from the implications, all of this was quickly classified. Opportunity would officially be declared as inoperative and would remain that way until further notice. Unofficially, research continued. The same team that worked with Spirit after she fell into that cave was assembled to investigate this mystery, and myself included. Oppie would still carry out the tasks instructed of him, and as such, an image was requested. In response, he sent back an almost natural photo of the Martian landscape. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary except for the rocks. Lying on the ground next to his wheels were 6 perfectly cut hexagonal prisms made out of what looked to be obsidian. Lowering the camera and taking another photo, markings were discovered on the objects. Unnervingly, they were all facing the screen and perfectly aligned at that. The markings on the objects were strange, to say the least. They resembled hieroglyphics in a way, yet they remained distinctively different. What felt especially eerie was that they resembled the sigil Spirit had found years prior. Scanning them gave us the exact same data Oppie was sending us during the storm. Normally, in a scientific situation, we try to take things logically. The reason we don't accept aliens did it as a solution to every mystery we encounter in space is that, in science, our goal is to find a natural explanation behind all observed phenomena. And in all situations we find ourselves in, there is one. Our goal is to find it. Well, there was nothing explainable nor natural about this. And still, assuming we had just discovered alien life, they should have left traces of something when interacting with objects. That would have been picked up by Oppie during his scans. If Opportunity was the one who placed the objects, that also doesn't make sense. The rocks weren't there before the storm, and the wheels are much too slow for Oppie to have somehow found them and returned to his location. And besides that, why would he behave in this way? He has to have been instructed to do this by something we were now somehow unable to detect, something that came during the storm. After a short debate, we instructed Oppie to pick up each prism and photograph it individually in hopes of possibly understanding what they were supposed to be. Multiple theories started up in the control room, quickly diverting attention. Assuming it was genuinely alien life, it is way too deliberate to have been an accident. Whatever alien life did this would be at least moderately intelligent. Maybe it was trying to greet us, but if that's the case, why like this? If it's aware we're watching, then why doesn't it show itself? The debates continued as Opportunity sent back photographs. Taking a break from the conversation, I briefly looked at the screen and immediately froze. The most recent image was of a second prism. Almost nothing unusual about that, but in the very far distance of the screen stood something. It was almost impossible to see behind all of the dust. I couldn't make out much of anything regarding the figure's appearance. I chalked it up to maybe being one of the other prisms, and the angle had made it appear further away. The third image disproved that. The figure was visibly closer this time, but still difficult to make out. From where it was shot, it was obvious whatever I was looking at was humanoid. It was rather short, about the size of a teenager. I took a moment and then waited for the fourth image. When it arrived, I nearly took a step back. At that point, it was clear that whatever this was, it had to be some sort of creature, and it was making its way towards Oppie. They were much easier to see, and judging by the sudden halting chatter around me, they were hunched over, standing on jagged and clawed feet. A glimmer of red could be seen glaring at the camera. The same crimson shade captured by Spirit in her last photograph. Equally red teeth could be seen in the beast's maddened grin, lined around a long snout. It had several large protrusions emerging from the back of its head, almost like tentacles in the form of hair. Hanging above its head were two very long tails, seemingly longer than the creature was tall, and sharp thorns covering them like razor wire. I wasn't afraid of its appearance. I was afraid that whatever this thing was, it was walking on the surface of Mars with apparently no issue. I was afraid of the malice in its eyes. I can't describe what it felt like. They pierced down into my soul, racking my heart with fear until it pounded uncontrollably, as if it was ready to burst from its cage. It didn't feel like it was looking at the rover nor the camera. It felt like it was looking at us. It couldn't be. It couldn't know. Even if it was aware the rover could see, it couldn't possibly know that Oppie's purpose is, and it certainly couldn't predict when the images are taken. The data transmission takes 6 minutes total, from when the order is sent to when it's received, and my heart stopped. The images were 3 minutes old, and we were looking at the past. The creature was already at the rover. Before I could even react to the realization, the screen flickered to what should have shown the fifth prism, and instead the camera was tilted over to face the creature, whose claws were wrapped around Oppie's body. Animosity filled its scornful gaze, and the crimson red that outlined its eyes and teeth took on a new hue, the same as the red rocks of Mars. And from the height of the photo, the creature must have been lifting Oppie, and the sixth image was never received. Opportunity never responded to any of our communication attempts after it sent that picture. And as far as anyone here knows, the creature destroyed the rover, leaving Curiosity alone on the barren surface. Obviously, it was very quickly decided that none of this would become public. Internally, we were a mess afterwards. It was undeniable proof of alien life, which we had searched for so long to find. And yet, while nobody could say why, it was more unnerving than exciting. We expected microbes, not an animal, let alone an intelligent one. And that's what gets to me the most, the way its eyes locked into mine. There's nothing I can say that could possibly describe the feeling of abject hatred in that beast's eyes. That wasn't instinct, it was malice. It hated humanity, and it hated Earth, and it wanted us to know that. Despite how horrifying the ordeal felt, I kept my composure as best I could and assisted in a cover-up. I don't think I abandoned my morals, nor do I think that NASA did the wrong thing by hiding this. Hell, even now, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing by telling you all. The discovery of life on another planet should be one of excitement, not dread. That's what I wanted people to feel when we made the announcement. And so, the true fate of Opportunity remained in the shadows. And there were few people who tried to go public about it, posting online, telling friends and family. Nobody believed them, and NASA knew that. And no, they're not dead in a ditch somewhere. And no, they're not dead in a ditch somewhere. There's not a lot of people with the education and expertise necessitated for our means, and besides, it'd be more suspicious if they did end up in a ditch. They did get one hell of a pay cut though, that's for sure. So, why am I finally telling you all about this? Sure, there's no risk to my life, and hey, they can cut my pay in half and I'd still be making more than the average family. But I supported them, helped them cover this, and I even sympathize with their reasoning. Well, it's because of what I saw last week. Due to the quarantine, I've been spending all of my time here at the base, monitoring Curiosity's search. And everything was going well, nothing out of the ordinary, until that Saturday. It was almost midnight when I noticed it. There it was, in the most recent photograph, just sitting there, tauntingly. 6 hexagonal prisms, each turned towards Curiosity. The creature I had seen, that we had all seen, and chose to deny, it sat atop a large rock, glaring into the camera with a tilted head. Its eyes and muzzle burrowed into a mocking expression. I could almost hear it sneer. Most everyone else was asleep or had left, and so the decisions came down to me. I just stood there, dumbfounded. This couldn't be the same creature. It just couldn't be. Curiosity is thousands of kilometers from opportunity. How could it have traveled that distance on foot? I knew by all logic it had to be a different member of the same species. But something in its eyes, the purely crimson dots, it told a different story. They were the same. I saw them through Spirit's eyes. I saw them through Oppie's. Hesitating and shaking, I sent a photo request and waited 6 long minutes for a response. I was greeted by the sight of the creature grinning maniacally. It was gesturing to the ground beneath its feet, standing there with the prisms, the clearest shot of all 6 at once. The sigils inscribed on their faces are visible as the hatred in the beast's soul. I've still yet to decode what they mean. I requested one more image on the off chance that curiosity was spared destruction. What I saw is why I've finally broken my vow of secrecy. It's why I'm telling you all this. Hell, it's why I might spill everything I find. Knowing this thing existed on the red planet, how intelligent it was and how scornful of man it seemed to be. That alone horrified me to want to forget the beast. It had crawled from the depths of insanity, the core of the planet of war itself. One single soldier capable of tearing through the strongest alloys we could construct. Just one. And in the last photo, there were thousands. I work for NASA, and there's missions to Mars that have been kept from us. Part 2. Let's get straight into that. If only I knew what kind of fucked up rabbit hole I was crawling into when I first saw those things on Mars. Well, when you enter this kind of work, you acknowledge that you're not getting out of it. You don't just leave the world of astronomy after discovering all of its wonders. No. When you enter that world, you become a part of it, a piece of an ever-growing puzzle. Astronomy is a science that becomes your kin. I've seen things I wish I hadn't, but I can't quit my quest to understand, to discover all that the universe has to offer. When I became an astronomer, when I accepted this position 17 years ago, I understood that it was something I would hold on to for the rest of my life. And now that it's led me to what it has, there really is no turning back. Right from the get-go, what I thought was the discovery of extraterrestrial life on another planet was merely another encounter with it. The earliest I can trace the first sighting of the creatures, I refer to them as Martians for simplicity and due to recommendations, dates back to 1971. Unfortunately, that was in a landing by the Soviets, and trying to sift through their files has led me nowhere so far. I'm left in the dark when it comes to that part, apart from the knowledge that the Soviets were aware of life on Mars decades before Spirit and Opportunity made history. How they did, I'll get into that, but for now, I will keep trying to uncover what I can. Unfortunately, the collapse of the Soviet Union makes this monumentally more difficult. Now, on to what we at NASA have found. And despite what I thought, Sojourner had no encounters with Martians. Rather, our first meeting was with the Mars Surveyor program in 1998. NASA launched 2 spacecraft that year, an orbiter and a lander. The official story is that the Mars Polar Lander lost contact upon descent, and the Mars Climate Orbiter crashed into the planet due to an error in which the craft utilized imperial seconds. As you can expect by now, this is far from the truth. Lander continued communications for at least 17 hours, and although most records are scrubbed, I found a mostly uncensored report. I'm not sure who recorded it, I've never seen them before, but it contains the bulk of information on Lander, and here's the transcript. This is going on record. The Mars Surveyor program has encountered unexpected interference. Touchdown occurred at roughly 2012 UTC on December 3rd. Lander failed to establish communications for 34 minutes before successful interactions occurred. Images showed location to be vastly different than anticipated. Lander made contact with a deep thin crater that led into a cavern. Probes failed to respond. No data was collected via Lander. Objects instead lifted by unseen force. Lander ceases communication for the next 23 minutes. Upon return, an image of a shrine was sent. Shrine appeared ritualistic in nature and was carved out of an unknown material, likely obsidian. The video pauses then to show the photo. The moulded material and the sigils inscribed into it reminded me all too well. A thick layer of some strange viscous yellow liquid was smeared on the shrine. I couldn't see any Martians in the frame, but I knew they were there. Second photo shows an unidentified figure standing at approximately 312 centimeters tall, maintaining a slender frame. Analysis from the biological department has concluded that the figure is an animal of reptilian descent. And there it is. There it fucking is, staring right at the camera, grinning with sadistic glee. The next two frames are simply clearer shots of both the Martian and the shrine. Whatever kind of fucked up religion they had, they were dedicated to it, and pieces of metal, presumably from prior landers, were used as decoration. Another similar figure appears, measures slightly shorter than 306 centimeters. The two figures kneel in front of the shrine. Communication ceases for 49 minutes. When it resumes, Lander has been moved back, giving it a clear view. Yet another figure is standing at the altar with a lowered head. Figure turns to face the camera. This one was odd. Markings were present along the creature's scales. For what purpose? We'll get into that later. The next few frames are simply more shots of this specific individual. And strangely, there's no malice in this one, merely a solemn gaze into the lens. It's the first Martian that didn't give me a death glare. 4 other figures entered the frame. The middle figure, hereby designated as the tribute, gets on top of the altar and lays down on its back. The 4 others each take one limb from the tribute and hold it in place before restraining the tribute to the shrine. Tribute shows signs of hesitation, and this frame appears to show them communicating with the others. The 4 figures exit the scene, leaving tribute alone. 9 minutes pass before a figure enters the frame and stares at the camera. I won't lie, I almost stopped there. Those eyes, I know them. Spirit knows them. Oppie knows them. It was as if this fucking thing was following me. But this was the past, long before Spirit made contact. My heart started racing faster after seeing it, but I pressed on. The voiceover ends, leaving just the photos streaming like video. Tribute seemed agitated, almost distressed even, as the larger creature stepped back, gaze fixated on the camera, and with its 2 hands it placed them onto Tribute's body, tracing the markings with its claws. And with a sickening grin, its claws pierced down into the Tribute's scales, tearing apart the flesh. There's no audio attached, but Tribute's expression changed from one of fear and desperation to one of agony. I won't go into detail here for the sake of your sanity, but Tribute was swiftly eviscerated with ruthless efficiency, splattering the shrine with yellow blood. They remained alive for a long while, but eventually succumbed to their wounds. The cuts were drawn along the symbols of their body, and when the deed was done, the monster rose from the shrine, eyes having never left the cameras, and then With one quick strike, it tore Lander apart, ending the signal. The rest of the report talks about the implications and the definitive cover-up that would need to happen. My first time watching, I was speechless. If these things were willing to slaughter their own so savagely, that doesn't bode well for future interactions. I didn't know where to look. The Soviets knew something. They did something. But Lander's fate gave no insight into what exactly they did. I had to look elsewhere, and my search eventually led to something entirely new. A completely off-the-records mission. One that was never revealed to the public, let alone what she had found. It was a rover crafted to follow up on Lander's findings, and this lone adventurer went unnamed. I've decided to name her Journey. It just felt wrong for any rover to go as just a statistic. Journey was secretly launched on January 29th, 2000. Her destination was the same as Lander's. Her cameras were much more equipped, and they were capable of sending an actual live feed rather than static images. She made touchdown in mid-February and quickly moved into where Lander had fallen. There's no report on this one, only video files and pictures. For the first 3 days, she just travels, finally finding a shrine late on the third night. The blood was dried by now, scarcely any evidence of the slaughter before. Journey continued to explore the shrine, finding smaller altars and very familiar obsidian rocks. And for a large chunk of the footage, no life was seen. Eventually, Journey makes her way down a small and cramped corridor before reaching an expansive open room. Hanging from the rocky ceiling sat dozens of bioluminescent flora, each glowing shades of blue, some dimmer than others. The soil beneath was coated with a dim red grass, and Journey paused for a moment, as if she was taking in the view. Small vines struck out from the grass with bulbous fruits attached, and carefully she crept towards one, reaching out and taking a fruit to examine it. It had an almost ocean blue colour and was shaped like a cross between a pear and a banana. Journey didn't have the dexterity to peel back the skin, not without damaging the fruit. I assume, so she gently placed it onto the ground. Following another passageway, she entered a slightly smaller room that shared many traits with the prior. Instead of pear-like fruit, this room seemed reserved for the cultivation of large watermelon-like fruit, differed only by its mango mixtures of colour. This room was a dead end, so Journey turned around, back the way she had came. The next few rooms were all the same calibre, a room containing a single type of fruit. It wasn't until Journey encountered a massive underground ravine that things changed. The small opening gave way to an expansive chasm, walls adorned with balconies and doorways all the way to the top. It was undeniable, an underground Martian village, and Journey stood for a moment, gawking at the sight, as I assume her handlers were too, simply moving the camera to view all that she could. In Journey's field of view caught several lingering creatures, the brightest and clearest view I'd ever had of them. One particular Martian was at work with the pieces of Lander, trying to mend it with another unidentified spacecraft. My eyes lit up as Journey slowly approached, giving a clearer view of the heavily faded flag of the USSR. The Soviets had definitely been here before, but, as expected, the craft fell victim to the hostile life. And despite the danger presented, Journey pushed forward until you could see the glimmer of the Martian's eyes. Like Tribute, this one, I'll call him Mechanic, was contrary to the typical malicious glare of his skin. Rather, it was one of the childlike curiosity, poking and pulling at the metal. And when Mechanic finally noticed Journey, they simply sat as the rover approached, arm extended. Mechanic pressed both of their tails against the rover in what I assume is a greeting, before turning their attention back. And fascinatingly enough, most of the Martians that interacted with Journey did so positively. It's surreal seeing them act so jovial to something they gleefully destroyed. Venturing further into the village, the rover found a small, icy blue pond. A quick analysis confirmed it was water, incredibly pure water at that. Lush red grass encircled the pond. Mechanic approached from behind, quickly getting onto their stomach to stare at Journey. Their eyes locked on as much as one could stare at a camera. The wonder in their eyes reminds me of myself, years prior. The excitement, the drive to want to know more. It almost made me forget about what I had seen them do. I probably would have, if not for what happened next. Mechanic's attention was drawn away suddenly by a loud sound, perhaps, and Journey followed suit 6 minutes later. By then, most of the Martians had left, only a few stragglers sticking around, and even fewer going down a wide path. Journey gave chase, slowly but surely. The path led her to a large room reminiscent of the shrine, except perhaps more refined and focused. Hundreds of Martians were gathered around, staring at the altar where those oh-so-familiar eyes were situated. And through the crowd, I could spot Mechanic, presumably talking to who, by now I assume, is their leader. After, their leader dashes towards the entrance, finding Journey before grinning. The defenseless rover was lifted and carried to the altar and placed to the side to observe. They wanted us to see this. Mechanic tried to leave, but was stopped by the leader, who pulled them back, forcing them onto the altar. I knew what would happen next, and I didn't want to see it. I looked away with held breath, praying that I would be wrong, but I was all too right. When I glanced back a minute later, his corpse was unrecognizable, mutilated beyond recognition. It was barbaric. How could a society so intelligent perform such horrific acts? And Journey peeked at the cheering crowd, sending a pit in my stomach. Not all were cheering, but they were definitely a minority. The crowd of Martians enjoyed the show, and somehow Mechanic was still alive, his eyes gazing into Journey's, beggingly. The rover stood still, and fury filled my veins. Her operators were letting this happen, and with one final plunge of the leader's yellow blood-soaked claws, Mechanic's life faded. I was hoping that that would be the end of it. It wasn't. As the leader unceremoniously tossed the body aside, 3 figures walked towards the altar, each lending their strength to carry a body of their own. Reaching the end of the hall, they were sprawled out, and my horror rose tenfold. They weren't bodies. They were people. Living, breathing people. Men on Mars. And they were terrified. The 2 males were chained to the altar, while the blonde woman was dragged to the Journey, where she was hidden off camera. I screamed at the rover to move, to help, to do something other than stand and watch. But her operators gave her no aid to assist, and Journey was as powerless as these men. The crowd seemed to go insane, beyond ecstatic at the prospect of a ritualistic slaughter. The man on the right with brown hair stared defiantly at leader, bravely facing his death with dignity. The quality of the camera was good enough to even let me see him spit at his killer mockingly. Judging purely by appearance, he was Russian. The Soviets had been to Mars, and they even landed on it. I can see why they didn't say a thing. The Russians' taunting was short-lived. Leader jabbed its claws into his abdomen with what must have produced a sickening crack. I grimaced at the sight, but pressed on. The man never screamed as far as I could tell. He seemed to be laughing in the face of death. I so wished there was audio to know what he had been saying. Even as leader furiously tore into his chest, the man stayed steadfast until he could laugh no more. A corpse on the slab. The man beside him seemed much younger and significantly less composed. Terror was visible on his face as leader prepared to deliver unto him the same fate. His eyes made contact with Journey, her lenses echoing the apathetic stance of her operators. The second man had no time to beg. Leader cracked open his chest, bursting it open like a newborn xenomorph would hatch from its host. The man thrashed, kicked, screamed and cried. It made no difference. Leader didn't care, and neither did the operators. Journey sat there, forced to watch along with the woman. The man's torment didn't last long. Mercifully, he died quick. Leader stepped back, hunching over with its head pointed up. It unhinged its jaws in what I can only imagine was an unholy roar of sadistic pride. The crowd was pleased, to say the least. Leader went on to drag out the woman who had tears in her eyes, forcing her to stare at the camera. She shook her head, reluctant at something, but her resistance was put to an end when Leader's razor-sharp bladed tail sliced across her back. She fell over, blood pouring out of her back before picking herself up, emotion draining from her face. She said something, her body trembling, before the feed finally cuts out and journeys end. The first time I saw that, I was distressed. I was scared. I was enraged. I didn't even try to think about what she had said. And the next day, I watched it again, preparing to transcribe it. It was only then my interest took note. Leader wanted her to say something. It was most definitely in Russian, a language that I'm not fluent in, let alone reading lips, alone to understand. I've given it my best shot and, well, there's no question about it. I have to find out what the Soviets found. I have to find out what they did. I'm too deep into this now, and hell, I probably know enough to where I might actually be in real danger now, especially with all I'm revealing. But the world needs to know. You have to know what she said. This is all our fault. I work for NASA, and here's how the Soviets made first contact. Let's get straight into that. My grandfather passed away in 2007. He was 70 years old exactly. He was old enough to have seen the moon landing live, all the way back in 1969. Most everyone who saw that footage was enamored by the prospect that we as a species had made it to the lunar, to a place our ancestors thought too far from our reach. Even now it fills people with a sense of wonder and awe for the solution of the impossible. My grandfather was the only man I knew who felt otherwise. A gut feeling told him that something terrible is out there in the stars, and that by landing on the moon, we opened a door to madness. After everything that's happened so far, I'm inclined to believe him. That insanity, of course, wasn't on the moon, but rather our dearest neighbour, Mars, the Roman god of war. At times I think how fitting that name has become over time. I've dug in as far as I can for answers, and just the opportunity to know a little more is all I seeked, and I found what I was looking for. Dear Lord, do I regret it. However, before I get into that, let me catch you up on things as well as answer a few questions and comments that I've received. A month ago, one of our rovers, Curiosity, encountered alien life on Mars. She is the third to do so that I know of after Spirit and Opportunity, all of which I was here to witness for myself. And just recently, I've discovered that the Soviets have not only landed spacecraft on Mars, but succeeded in doing what NASA has not, putting man on Mars. Now, let me address some comments. I've seen a few people suggesting we glass or nuke the planet. I don't need to explain why that won't work. We can barely send rovers to Mars, let alone nuclear weapons. And furthermore, these creatures have adapted to survive on the surface, so I doubt the resulting radiation would have much effect if the sun does nothing. We'd need a much more powerful weapon than what we have access to now. Some people have also mentioned that perhaps we are the intruders, and I don't know what to say to that. Hell, we might be to some, but they appear to have a vendetta against us specifically. Next, someone mentioned they might be building a rocket. I'm inclined to agree after what I've seen now. I can only hope that they fail. I'll explain that later. Now, with that out the way, let me tell you what I've found. Much to my dismay, the Soviets did a damn good job at covering up their landings, so much so that almost all of the records are lost or destroyed. Almost all of them. A scarce few remain, and with a bit of digging and bribery, I've gotten a look at them. Most of it is heavily redacted, apart from the centerpiece, what I was definitely happy to find. The live feed recording of the Soviets' Martian landing from 1989, audio and all. I can't upload the video as it will almost definitely attract attention, and that's why I haven't uploaded anything beyond my posts, but I certainly can transcribe this for you. The feed starts from the cone of the landing craft as it descends onto the Martian landscape, and for a few minutes nothing of note happens until the door unseals and slowly opens. Out steps a man who cuts the feed, swapping it to show video and audio from his helmet, exclaiming in Russian. I don't know what exactly he said. He faces the rather impressively large pod from which the female Stella Zolina, if records are correct, from Journey's footage exists, and she is visibly much younger, 10 years younger in fact. My stomach churns thinking about how long she had been held captive there. The two begin a short exchange. "Touchdown?" she asks. Yes, we did it. Can you hear us, Commander? We are on the surface," the man replies with beaming enthusiasm. The woman steps aside to give room for the rest of the crew to come out. It's a rather large crew of 7 people. 2 men who I recognize from Journey's footage are among them. Thanks to documents, I know that their names are Maxim Durov and Yakov Selner. The 6 crew members gathered in a line as the camera operator showed them off one by one, admiring the dedication and heroism of his crew. "Yakov, you seeing this? I can't believe it," one cosmonaut, Sergei Chernov, says. Yakov, the crying man from the previous video, steps out of formation and looks around in awe. He's joined by 2 others. "We are heroes, the pride and joy of millions. How could I believe it?" Yakov answers. The second woman documents name her as Natia Letova, re-enters the capsule along with Maxim and a man named by documents as Lukok Turbin, and that leaves Damian Poltanov as the cameraman. The footage is mostly uneventful for the first 30 minutes or so. Mostly the crew discussing their excitement and pride for the successful landing while they set up equipment and gather samples. Yakov takes a Soviet flag from the craft and ventures with Sergei to find a place to plant it. "Careful, and be back in 10, no less," Damian orders. Yakov chuckles and keeps walking. I can almost feel Damian roll his eyes. He steps into the pod, and the next 10 minutes are simply just waiting. Of course, neither Yakov nor Sergei returned. "Yakov, what's the hold-up?" Luchok asks impatiently. No response. "Yakov? Sergei?" Nothing but silence. "Come in, Yakov." "This is Sergei. Can you read me?" Sergei's voice is dumbstruck, contrasting how tough it sounds otherwise. "We found a structure." Luchok turns to look at Damian in confusion. Natia has no answers either, if she even noticed. "Explain, Sergei." "It's a cavern, deep, we can't see far into it. Yakov wouldn't listen and he went down, lost comms, and tried to follow, but it's too dark." And there's a hint of panic in Sergei's voice. I could tell what cavern he had found. I knew exactly what he was referring to. The shrine. "Fucking idiot, Yakov. How did he even pass? Sergei, stay where you are. Maxim, Stella, bring him a lamp. Go find that idiot. Damian, Natia, stay with me." I could agree with Luchok's ire. Even though he couldn't have known, Yakov was clearly not the brightest. Maxim and Stella pack up a few supplies before heading out. Damian gives the camera to Stella, and the 2 head out. The trek to Sergei felt even familiar, the unmarked ground being filled with footsteps that would have been joined by a rover slow riding across the ground. When Sergei came into view, he waved at Maxim as the cavern was visible behind him. It confirmed my fears. It was definitely the same cavern Lander and Journey had encountered. Hey, we got a lamp. Have you heard from Yakov?" Maxim asked, setting down the lamp and looking into the hole in the surface. "Nothing, man. Not even static. Idiot's probably lost by now. I told him not to go in. At least I kept the flag. Sergei gestured to the Soviet flag, whose pole was firmly planted into the ground. A sense of national pride filled his eyes. I stay here. Don't get lost now. And keep in touch with me, LeChuck. Maxim moved to the flag, standing tall next to it as it flapped in the wind. Stella, with me then? Nice. Sergei chuckled and glanced at Stella, who scoffed. In your dreams, Sergei. Stella shot him down. We are at the crevice. Trench is about 3 meters in diameter. Maxim will stay up here while Sergei and I look for Yakov. That good, Commander? Permission granted. Go ahead, you two. Don't get lost, LeChuck replied. And with that, Sergei and Stella made their way into the cavern. Maxim held the light, leading the way while Stella followed behind him. Occasionally, she'd look down and pick up a rock or some dirt. It wasn't until she encountered a 6-sided obsidian prism that she spoke again. Come, look at this. Sergei turned around and walked over to her, glancing down at the rock she held in her palm. What the hell is that? Don't know. Maxim, LeChuck, can you hear us? Stella called in, but there was no reply. Judging by the terrain, they were almost at the shrine. Damn, no signal. Too far down. You heard from Yakov yet? No, I haven't heard anything from him. Let's... Sergei was interrupted by an ear-piercing shriek. When I first watched it, I fell back from my chair in shock. It was incredibly loud, inhuman scream that was tinged with pain and fear. Sergei and Stella rushed down the halls to the source, when Yakov's voice finally came in. He was screaming incoherently, violently swearing and gasping for breath before the two reached him at the shrine. Dead on the floor with yellow blood was a smaller Martian, whose head was bashed in with a rock held by Yakov. What the fuck? Sergei didn't have time to even ask questions before 3 more poked their heads into the chamber, rage visible in their eyes from the sight of one of their dead. The next few minutes were a blur. Stella made a break back the way she had came, while Sergei stayed to try and defend Yakov. But, as the tapes from the future showed, their fight wouldn't matter. Frantic panting started to fill the audio, drowning out the sounds and screams and fighting from the shrine. Miraculously, Stella got close enough to regain communication with Maxim, who picked up her horrified, gasping. What the hell is going on down there? We lost you 6 minutes ago. What? Get back to the fucking shuttle, Maxim, Stella demanded. Calm down, Stella, I can't. There's something down here. Now fucking move, Maxim. Something, you mean? Yes, Maxim. Now hurry. They're right behind me. Stella looked back to see 2 Martians running across the cavern's floors on all fours, chasing her with a maddening bloodlust. A light at the end of the tunnel gave way to the surface, where Stella nearly collapsed into Maxim's arms. Their reunion was short-lived thanks to the creatures behind, which grabbed onto Stella and began dragging her back into the cave. She screamed in horror, kicking and fighting all she could, but the monsters had the upper hand. They tore into her spacesuit, trying to reach the skin beneath. I give credit to the Soviets. These suits weren't cheap, and it showed. The creatures that I had seen tear metal to shreds couldn't make a dent in the suit. Maxim must have realized things were lost when even more emerged from the cave as he started running back towards the shuttle, while the Martians gave up on trying to get to Stella's body and simply opting to drag her back into the darkness as she screamed and begged for help. The feed cuts out then and there. I thought that was it, but when I went to stop the footage, I noticed how long it was. It was days long, and given a cursory glance, showed that most of it was black, empty feed. That is, until the end of the 5th day, when the footage finally returns. Stella is sitting in some sort of prison chamber, holding the camera in her hands and pointing it towards her face. She's still wearing the tattered and dirty remains of her spacesuit, and she weeps softly. After a few seconds, she spoke. This is Stella Zolina, aged 27.
part of the USSR's Martian Expanse program. I don't know if Command is receiving this. Likely not. The transmitter should still be online back at the shuttle, if the shuttle is intact, that is. I don't know if it is or not. I am reporting one confirmed fatality. Natia Letova. May she rest in peace as an honor to her country. Those things, they killed her. Took her out to some sort of table, strapped her down, and tore out her guts. Made us watch as their fucked up crowd cheered them on. Yakov is badly injured. They're letting us patch him up. I don't know why. I don't know why they're keeping us alive. There is air down here. It's impossible and shouldn't be the case, but there's breathable air down here. I saw a couple of plants and farms on my way in. I can hear them speak sometimes. What I assume must be night. I can't tell down here, and it's hard. Their voices are a bit scratchy and range from mellow to violent. I think there's some now. Hold on.
Stella pauses, holding the camera close to the wall. I can vaguely make out the sounds of alien chatter. Their voices seemed wrong, somehow. I don't know how to put it, but it made me feel very uneasy. It's difficult to describe. The best way to put the sound is a mixture between some sort of reptilian croaking and an Asian dialect.
I'm sorry, I'm distracted now. I just want to go home, you know? Never thought I would get accepted for this program. When I first got on the ship, I thought this would be something amazing, and we did land here. We did. We've made it to Mars. I don't think the inhabitants are happy about it. I don't know if it's because Yakov killed one. He says it attacked him first. Another thing I noticed is that every day they take one of their own down into that room we found, and after a few minutes they come back without them, coated in blood. Sergei says it's some sort of sacrificial ritual. They drag the last one kicking and screaming. I don't know why they are killing their own and not us, but...
Stella is interrupted by off-camera shuffling, which prompts her to turn the camera towards the noise, showing Damien, still in his spacesuit but awake, besides him, Luchok, who is tending to Yakov. You finally got that thing working. They need to send men up here and fucking trash the place. Shoot every single one of those fucking lizards. Those bastards deserve it after what they did to... Damien himself is interrupted when Luchok interjects. Don't be a fucking idiot, Damien. You think anyone's going to help? Luchok scoffs, shaking his head. It reminds me of the dates of this recording, 1989. 31 years ago. He was right, nobody would save them. Hell, we knew about them since 1999 and we didn't even bother to help. We just covered it up and moved on. Damien grumbles and walks towards Stella, taking a seat right next to her. He offers to hold the camera wordlessly, and she obliges, handing it over to him. They took Sergei and Maxim for... something. I don't know what. They still haven't found the ship as far as we know. When Sergei explained, we decided to abandon the ship, leading those things, of course. God knows that if they have found it, they are looking for it. I think they know that they can't get them to Earth. Fuck, if they find it. Damien's grim expression as he stared hopelessly into the camera spoke miles. The sudden recognition in his eyes gave way to sorrow. I remembered that we never saw that craft. Movement comes from outside the cell, and Damien aims the camera to watch him. A group of Martians move towards it, pushing Sergei and Maxim along. Damien stops breathing for a moment, and the view of the camera shaking intensely. Luchok, how long do the ship's transmitters function after touchdown? Damien asks, his voice dead set on a suicidal idea that I already knew he'd go through with.
About a week or two tops. Why?
Luchok answers, oblivious to Damien's idea. Stella gasps, seemingly putting two and two together.
I am going to get this camera to the ship and send a feed to command. Then I am going to activate the launch sequence.
Damien explains his plan. Stella quietly pleads with him not to as the Martians grow closer.
The launch sequence won't function without the coolant tanks. It will blow itself apart.
I know.
Do you need us to buy you some time?
Luchok is heard getting up as well, and Stella sighs, realizing that there is no use arguing against Damien.
Do whatever you can do. Sergi and Maxim are smart enough to know. I can get back there easily. I'll get this sent out so command knows what kind of fucked up shit is down here.
Stella and Luchok were silent in agreement. When the Martians opened the cell door, the three of them charged into them, catching all off guard. Damien made a break for it with the camera as the others did what they could to hold them back. After a short scuffle, Luchok's pain screams echoed throughout the damp, dark corridors before it turned to an eerie gurgling, as I could only assume his body was defiled and ripped into endless shreds. Thankfully, Damien didn't turn the camera back to look. He kept going through the caves, reaching the massive area Journey would encounter a decade later, and then running into the farming rooms. I knew he'd make it, but the tense sounds of the creatures crawling across the halls right behind him. I don't know how he had the courage to keep running. Past the familiar shrine, adorned with a Martian's mangled corpse, indicating a recent sacrifice, and into the natural formations of the cave until the distant beams of the sun were shining through the crack in the surface. The flag of the USSR was still firmly attached to its flagpole, and Damien ripped it from the ground and finally glanced behind him with the camera. He swung the pole with all of his strength as one of the Martians came to the surface, knocking them back into the others in a pile. Taking the advantage while they were down, he speared the pole through all five of them, slicing into their scowled flesh and sending their blood flying with an audible yell. Victorious, Damien continued his sprint towards the craft, having bought himself time. In the distance, it came into view. Damien clutching the camera tightly in his hand, I could hear more scampering behind him, and they were back on track. He quickly undid the sill, pulling a hatch and climbing inside. Before he could close it, one of the Martians dived into the opening, becoming trapped with him inside. The noises outside stopped, and it was clear they didn't want to risk destroying the spacecraft. Damien swung at the monster inside the craft, knocking them to the ground. It took a moment to show the view outside from the interior of the shuttle before speaking one last time.
If this thing is still on, stay the fuck away from here. You got that?
The feed finally ends as Damien presumably hooked the camera to send back all the footage it had obtained. The rest of the Soviets' records showed that the craft stopped sending any signals 8 minutes later, indicating its destruction in a failed takeoff. The Soviets were dumbfounded and horrified. All of their remaining reports indicate the absolute chaos they devolved into after. Hell, it may have even contributed to the collapse of the Union, for all I know. Thoughts of many people believing it may be best to destroy nations to hide the truth. Whatever the case, Russia isn't even aware of this. Everyone assigned around that time either went into isolation, assumed new identities, or took their lives. After I saw it, after I took it all in, I don't know what to do anymore. The Martians are not only aware of us, they almost definitely were attempting to rebuild that spacecraft. And God knows what the hell they'll do when they get here. Even if we have the upper hand, who knows how many lives will be lost. Other than that, there was nothing more I could find from the Soviets. I tried looking for information from other space agencies, and there's absolutely nothing that I could find. And that was until I looked back at us, back at NASA. I mentioned earlier that it would be impossible to just glass or nuke the planet. I stand by that statement. You see, I found out why NASA kept sending rovers to Mars. Why we keep sending things up to that planet that those creatures could use against us. We can't launch a nuke and hope it kills them. is too precise of a projection. What we can do is send something that they wouldn't think twice about, something that would unknowingly take into the heart of their people, a Trojan horse. Remember back when I first decided to tell you all about this? The rover Curiosity, she's still active. The Martians took her back into the cave and she's still sending feeds. And they took it to the cave, the one that all had found before and fallen victim to. They want to show us another sacrifice. They want to show Curiosity her first and only blood show before they destroy her. The Martians are preparing for it, and they should perform their ritual sometime next week, and Curiosity is ready. Ready to do what she's always been destined to do. And I can only hope she pulls this off. Wow. Absolutely chest-pounding and thought-provoking storyline there. Wonderful stuff. Thank you ever so much once again to the author, Depsurrel. Again, I do hope I pronounced that right. Hope you enjoyed this as much as I did working with you, and I look forward to the May the 2nd update, I'm sure as much as the listeners do. Well, guys and girls, you know the drill. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag Team Fear. Definitely going to start rolling out more sci-fi stories, guys. It's a wonderful escape, and there's so many different rabbit holes and avenues we can travel down together. Of course, if you have a story, or you've always wanted to become a writer and have a crack at things, you can get in touch with myself at the email, which is dmtforestofear@gmail.com, and I look forward to hearing from you. As ever, guys, I hope you're all well and happy, and above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.